check your bank account on payday. For a moment, the number looks like enough. Then it starts disappearing. Rent, groceries, gas, the bill you forgot about. By the time the next payday rolls around, you're checking again, hoping this time it will finally feel like enough. It never does. You assume this is a flaw in your budgeting, or your spending habits, or your self-control, but the real answer is far stranger. It has nothing to do with money at all. It's the same exact equation given to a group of frightened, hungry people walking through a desert more than 3,000 years ago. Their story is recorded in the book of Exodus. They had just escaped slavery in Egypt. Freedom should have felt like relief. Instead, it felt like fear. There was no food in the wilderness, no stored grain, no fields, no certainty about tomorrow. And so they did what frightened people have always done. They panicked, and they blamed the very freedom they had just been given. That's when something strange started falling from the sky. Every morning, a thin, flaky substance covered the ground like frost. The people had never seen anything like it. They called it manna, which in Hebrew simply means, "What is it?" That's not a brand name. That's a question. They were eating a miracle and still didn't know what to call it. Here's where the story stops being simple. God gave one instruction along with the food. Gather only what you need for today, not extra, not a stockpile, just enough. Some people listened, others didn't. Fear is a hard habit to override with a single command, even a divine one. Some gathered far more than they needed, quietly tucking the extra away for tomorrow, just in case the miracle didn't repeat itself. It felt responsible. It felt wise. It felt like basic survival instinct. By the next morning, what they had saved was rotten. Worms moved through it. The smell was unbearable. The very food that had fed them the day before had become something they couldn't even look at. Why would a miracle expire that fast? This is the part most people miss when they hear this story told as a simple Sunday school lesson. The manna wasn't just a meal. It was a daily test of trust. The instruction to gather just enough wasn't a random rule. It was designed to interrupt a pattern almost every human being carries without realizing it. The belief that safety comes from accumulation. There was one exception built into the law, and it matters. On the sixth day, the people were told to gather a double portion. And on that one day only, the extra didn't rot. It stayed fresh through the seventh day, the Sabbath, a day set aside for rest instead of gathering. The same food, the same conditions, a completely different result depending on when and why it was kept. Read that again. The rot wasn't a property of the manna. It was a consequence of the motive behind keeping it. Hoarded out of fear, it decayed. Set aside in obedience and trust, it lasted exactly as long as it needed to. The desert wasn't testing their stomachs. It was testing what they believed about provision. Researchers studying scarcity today have stumbled onto something that sounds almost identical, just dressed in modern language. Behavioral economist Sendil Mullainathan and psychologist Eldar Shafir spent years studying how a scarcity mindset changes the way people think, not just what they own. Their research found that when people believe there isn't enough, their minds narrow. Long-term thinking shrinks. Hoarding, overspending, and short-term panic decisions increase, even among people who technically have resources. Scarcity, they found, isn't only a condition of your bank account. It's a condition that hijacks your brain's bandwidth, whether the threat is real or only feared. That's worth sitting with for a moment. The wilderness generation wasn't only short on food, they were short on trust, and the hoarding wasn't really about hunger. It was about fear disguised as planning. There's a second, quieter study that echoes the same pattern. Psychologist Philip Brickman, in research that's still cited decades later, looked at lottery winners and people who had experienced catastrophic accidents. The surprising finding was that within a relatively short period of time, both groups returned to roughly the same baseline level of happiness they had before the life-changing event. More money didn't permanently raise the floor. It just raised the number people needed to feel like they finally had enough, which kept moving the moment they reached it. Sound familiar? It's the same trap, just wearing a paycheck instead of a jar of manna. Even the discomfort itself has a name in modern psychology. Daniel Kahneman's research on loss aversion found that the pain of losing something hits roughly twice as hard, emotionally, as the pleasure of gaining the same amount, which means the person can have more than enough and still feel like they're losing ground, simply because their mind is wired to fear the drop far more than it celebrates the gain. No wonder the number on a bank statement never quite feels safe. The brain isn't built to register enough. It's built to register threat. Now picture the wilderness again. Imagine waking up every single morning needing to trust that today's portion would be there, with no stockpile to fall back on, no surplus to calm the fear. That's not just an ancient inconvenience. That's a daily spiritual discipline, repeated for 40 years, designed to retrain a generation that had only ever known scarcity under slavery, how to live without panic. This is the part that should land somewhere uncomfortable. The test was never really about food. It was about whether a person could lie down at night, having only what was needed for that day, and still feel secure. Most of us have never had to gather food off the ground each morning, but the test never actually left. It just changed shape. It shows up in the way a paycheck disappears into a feeling of dread before it even clears. It shows up in the urge to check a savings account repeatedly, as if watching the number will somehow make it grow. It shows up in the empty grocery store shelves during a crisis, when fear convinces otherwise reasonable people to buy 6 times more than their household could use, while someone 2 aisles over goes without. The behavior is the same. Only the marker font has changed from manna to milk and toilet paper. There's a strange kind of mercy hidden inside the original instruction, easy to miss at first glance. Gather only what you need for today. That's not a punishment. That's permission. Permission to stop calculating tomorrow's worst-case scenario before today is even finished. Permission to rest instead of stockpile. Permission to trust that tomorrow's portion will be there when tomorrow actually arrives, instead of trying to drag tomorrow's burden into today's shoulders. That permission is harder to receive than it sounds. Trust, it turns out, isn't a feeling that shows up on command. It's a muscle, built one daily portion at a time, the same way it had to be built one morning at a time in the desert. Anyone who has tried to trust more through sheer willpower already knows it doesn't work that way. It has to be practiced in small doses, usually right at the edge of where the fear lives. What's remarkable is how little the underlying problem has changed in 3,000 years. Different desert, same heart, different currency, same fear. The wilderness generation thought their problem was a lack of food. Their actual problem was a lack of trust in the one providing it, one day at a time, without ever once being late. Maybe that's the real reason the hoarded manna rotted overnight. Not as a punishment, but as a mirror. A way of showing, in the clearest possible terms, that the thing being gripped so tightly out of fear was never actually capable of providing the security it promised in the first place. The security was never in the surplus. It was always meant to be in the relationship behind the provision. You still check your bank account on payday. The number still rarely feels like enough, no matter how high it climbs. But maybe the test was never really about the number at all. Maybe the test was always whether you could trust today's portion enough to finally stop bracing for tomorrow's.